Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to our home for Shabbat B'Yachad services. Shabbat B'Yachad means Shabbat together. And I'm so glad we're all together tonight. We're going to be singing on page 14 in our Xeroxed prayer books that are downloadable on the website. We're going to be singing, page 14, how good and how pleasant it is when all of us dwell together. Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad.
Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov, yara lai, la 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 la. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. La 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 la. Hinei ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hinei ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad.
You know, the COVID-19 infection has reached an inflection point. It was easier in some ways when we were told, stay at home, shelter in place, when the rules were very clear, flatten the curve. And we heard it over and over again, and the numbers were rising, and the curve wasn't flattening. And so we did the right thing, we stayed home. And here and around the country, the curve has begun to flatten in some places, not yet in others. It's still a precarious time. But now society is opening up slowly. And now we're called upon to exert greater self-discipline than even before. This is where we have to use our seichel, our common sense. How much time to spend outside, how far to go. We need to be disciplined about sanitizing our hands and surfaces. We need to be careful to wear masks and to keep social and physical distancing. This future of COVID-19, this future will depend on us. And each one of us needs to be responsible, not just for ourselves, but for all those around us. Now, that's why tonight at services, Dr. Eric Alcouloumre, an emergency medicine specialist, a physician at Hoag Hospital, and a longtime member of University Synagogue, is going to be speaking tonight at services. And he writes a blog about COVID-19, and he's been keeping us up on this blog, keeping us up on the progress and our responsibilities as well. Well, I'm going to interview Eric in a little while. We're going to hear the latest about the pandemic. So let's turn in our services to a reading that tells us that we are an eternal people. And it tells us that through the eternal light. And so I'm going to read this reading before we light the Shabbat candles. Shabbat candles represent creation, enlightenment, the fire inside of us that makes us want to be moral, the spark of godliness within us that makes us want to reach out and help others. So this is a very practical pandemic poem for these very unusual times. The mask feels at home on my face like a worn key in a front door's lock. I make cinnamon rolls without a recipe, and it works. Like a miracle, we wipe the counters 20 times a day. We pour the children glasses of milk over and over, and when we open the refrigerator to grab the jug's thick plastic handle, a brightness inside stands sentry, holding us in its light for a moment. I used to imagine that the refrigerator bulb stayed on all the time, like the everlasting light, the Ner Tamid, that hangs before the Holy Ark in every synagogue. But now that I'm older and have seen how everything can be lost in a moment, I now understand two things. One, the refrigerator truly is dark when it's closed. And two, In every synagogue, someone changes that light bulb. Some custodian or rabbi or teacher or congregant or volunteer. And though this sounds like the start of a joke, it's exactly the opposite. In the face of all that would extinguish us, we pour milk, we bake, we take turns, we wear masks, we keep the light burning. We keep each other alive. We join together for the blessing over the Shabbat candles.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu להדליק נר של שבת.
We turn to Shalom Aleichem on the first page of our prayer books, and we join together welcoming in Shabbat.
Shalom Aleichem, מלאכי השרת, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. שלום עליכם, מלאכי השרת, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. בואכם לשלום, מלאכי השלום, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ברכו מלשלום, מלאכי השלום, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ברכו מלשלום, מלאכי השלום, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. צאתם שלום, מלאכי השלום, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. שלום עליכם, מלאכי השרת, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. שלום עליכם, מלאכי השרת, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Greet those around you if you're with other people. Greet us as we greet you if you're alone tonight. We next think of our health care workers like Dr. Alcouloumre, who will speak in a little while. Think of all the doctors and the nurses and the technicians and those who clean the hospitals and those who administer the hospitals. Think of all those people who risk their lives for us. And so this prayer is for them. Bless me today as I take my heart, my hands, and my soul to do the work of Tikkun Olam, as I take upon myself the mitzvah to love my neighbor as myself. Guide my heart in kindness, compassion, and hope. Let me not be afraid. Do not let me become so terrified that I do not take actions to protect my life and to heal others. Guide my hands gently and courageously as I use them to do what needs to be done. Help me to use my knowledge and my skill and my education to help find new answers to unfathomable questions and problems during this crisis. Guide my soul to stay connected and grounded with the flow of life. Provide me with energy and endurance, and may we rise to this challenge and remember to serve others with joy. Allow me to return home to my family, to spare myself and them this illness. Help me choose life so that those within my reach will be blessed. We join on page 2 with the young Cantors, singing the Baruch Hu. Now we turn to page 4 for the Shema and the V'ahavta. And as we know, there are two pandemics going on, the pandemic of the coronavirus, but also the pandemic of racism. And we all knew it. Sometimes we looked away. Sometimes we focused on the progress that African Americans have made in our society, but neglected to see still how far behind they too often were economically. We looked the other way when there was homelessness in minority communities. We ignored that we were such a stratified society. Next Friday night, Doug Haynes, the Vice Chancellor of UCI, will be with us, and as an African American, he is acutely aware of societal differences between majorities and minorities. And he's been very dedicated on UCI's campus to bringing different ethnicities, religions, and races together. And so Doug will be with us next week. But for right now, let's close our eyes and take some deep, relaxing Shabbat breaths, breathing in Shabbat. And breathing in the very powerful words of the Shema. We're all one, divinity, humanity, one race, one human race, a vision that's 2,500 years old in the Tanakh and the Torah that tells us to see what we have in common with everyone, and not so often, as we too often do, push people away, discriminate, differentiate, forget that we're all made of the same human stuff. Breathe in Shabbat.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevor Shem Kevor Malchuto Leolam
We continue with the Ahavta.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך.
And so here's a reading for health in our society, a healing prayer. Bless those who are ill with a refuah shlema, complete healing of body and spirit. May they find the strength to move safely through this time of fear and pain, through this time of disease and uncertainty. And may their loved ones find comfort through the love of their families, friends, and communities. Let us faithfully support our health professionals who put their own lives at risk to treat their patients. May we do what we must do to ensure that scientists and researchers have the resources they need to diagnose illness and prevent its spread. Let us demand that our leaders and officials honor the public trust that we've entrusted to them by prioritizing the health of our communities. May we forever fight for the well-being of those who are the most vulnerable in our midst, the poor, the homeless, the disabled, and the uninsured. And when this pandemic is over, may it happen b'mehera v'yameinu, soon in our day, let us commit to building at long last a society that takes responsibility for the health of all who dwell in our midst. We continue in our prayer books with Vishamru, the Song of Shabbat, page 6.
שמרו בני ישראל את השבת, את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם, לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת, שבת וינפש.
We turn to Mishabeirach, a prayer for healing, on page 15 of our Sidurim. Let's think of those who are facing health challenges. We wish them refuah shlema, people in our families and among our friends, people who fear what is going on in our society medically and other ways who feel dis-ease, people who feel anxiety, people who are in need of healing in so many ways and so many levels, spiritual, emotional, and physical. We wish them all healing. Refuah Shlema. We join together, Misha Beirach.
Misha Beirach Avoteinu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishe Beirach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah Shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
We pick up our Kiddush cups and we join for the traditional blessing over wine, Kiddush, and also the traditional motzi and the modern egalitarian motziah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
L'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, nivarech et ein hachayim, hamotziah lechem min haaretz. We turn in our prayer books to page 12 for this reading before Mourners Kaddish at the top of the page, and we all join together, led by the Cantor.
What we have once enjoyed, we can never lose. A sunset, a mountain bathed in moonlight, the ocean in calm and in storm. We see this, love their beauty, hold the vision in our hearts. All that we love deeply becomes a part of us.
We turn to page 11. Please rise for Mourners Kaddish. We think of those who have passed away in recent times, perhaps the yard site of someone, the anniversary of the death, perhaps someone who passed away during this year, or there's someone who maybe passed away a long time ago who you especially miss. Something about this service tonight, something about this past week reminded you of them. Something very dear. Perhaps you saw something in your home, a picture. Perhaps a memory came into your mind. Whoever you're thinking of tonight, whoever has passed away, whom you miss, think of them as we join together for Mourners Kaddish, for all those whom we remember. Zichronam livracha. Their memories are a blessing to us all. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabba, b'yalma divrach hirutei v'yamliach malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'galav yizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach v'yalamu l'mei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitalev, v'yitalal, shemei kudsha, briachu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran b'yoma, v'imru amen. Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru amen. We join together remembering those, as we sing these words of peace. We ask for peace on us, on our people, and all humanity.
Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen.
Shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen. Stay tuned for my interview with Dr. Eric Alcouloumre on the pandemic and what we can do to flatten the curve, what we can do to stay safe, what we can do to keep others safe. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Eric. It is my pleasure to introduce someone who really needs no introduction at University Synagogue, Dr. Eric Alcouloumre, who is an emergency medicine physician in Newport Beach at Hoag Memorial Hospital. He received his medical degree from the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. He trained in emergency medicine at LA County USC Medical Center, where he also served on the faculty. He's been in practice for more than 35 years. He's currently on Hoag Hospital's board of directors, which is a very prestigious position because he and two other physicians were elected to that board by their fellow colleagues, by their medical colleagues. He's also Associate Director of Emergency Services at Hoag Hospital and a very long-time member of University Synagogue. So, Eric, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Rabbi, for the invitation, and Shabbat Shalom to you and everybody else.
Thank you. When we at the synagogue were trying to establish our policy in regard to COVID-19, you were one of the people whom I called to ask about what is happening, what's going to happen, what do you think we should do as an institution, and you were incredibly helpful. We talked to you and to other physicians and public health officials. You were incredibly helpful in that regard. And one of the ways we knew you were very involved was we began to read your blog. So your blog can be accessed by just going to Facebook and typing in your name. But tell us about your COVID-19 blog. Why did you start it? Who were you writing it for? And what did you start to observe and critique yourself?
So the blog it's an interesting phenomenon. It just sort of happened organically. It really started when my wife, who many of you know, was discouraged about the lack of information that she was seeing coming from my hospital, from the community, in terms of informed leaders. and more than the lack of information coming from them, it was just the pile of information coming from elsewhere that was really misinformation. And you may have seen some of this. This is back in mid-March, I think we started, just about the same time that the governor gave his lockdown orders. And you were seeing things like people telling you that you needed to kill the virus by taking a hairdryer and shoving it up your nose for a period of time. There was another rumor circulating at the time, allegedly coming from Stanford, I think, where if you could hold your breath for 30 seconds, you didn't have the coronavirus. And this stuff was circulating on social media. Her friends were texting it to each other, and they were just spreading the misinformation really to our detriment. People weren't doing the right things and didn't understand what was going on. So I finally capitulated and wrote a one-time post, this sort of taking that stuff on. And it actually got shared over 1,000 times. I mean, in the past, I put up a political post or maybe a piece of music I had written and recorded and wanted to share it. And I'd get very excited if 20 or 30 people, shared it. but here I was up in the thousands, and it just kept increasing. And so I just started doing this on a daily basis, figuring I'd do it for a few days. And it just, every day I wake up and I read the news and I go, oh, that's not right. I got to talk about that. And it gives me an opportunity to vent and to try and really combat conspiracy theories and misinformation. I am sharing my opinion. I'm not an infectious disease expert. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. I do see cases, at work. And so I do need to know what's going on. And I try and share what I know and what makes sense and try and keep it simple and try and combat the conspiracy theories and misinformation that are taking us down the wrong path.
And there is so much misinformation. I mean, in some ways, online platforms are a blessing. I mean, the ability to be able to communicate like this during the coronavirus pandemic. But because of such ignorant and sometimes intentionally misleading information online, you have so many fronts in which you have to bring healing. It's not just in the hospital. The blog is a very effective way, and everybody I know is talking about this blog. So it's a very effective way to reach people, even when things seem ludicrous, when people read things online, because everybody is so worried and panicked.
Yes.
They kind of wonder, well, maybe could it be? So your voice is a very helpful voice. So tell me, how do you think Orange County is doing? And if you can trace the trajectory, in other words, over the last 3 months and right now, and maybe even a projection for the next 3 to 6 months. It's a lot to ask, but can you do that with us? Trace it?
I can do my best. And again, my message is really pretty simple. And so my explanation, I hope, will be pretty simple and understandable and easy to follow. Because if you do get away from all of the noise from the conspiracy theories and the craziness out there, it shouldn't be that hard to understand what we're dealing with. So if you go back to the early days of the pandemic, I won't spend a lot of time talking about January, other than to make the point that was when our first case was admitted to our Irvine hospital. We were all paranoid and terrified and didn't know what was going to happen, but reasonably thought, we did this with Ebola, we did it with SARS, we did it with MERS. We know how to put on the gear, we know how to isolate the patients, and if we can identify them, test them, isolate them, and protect everybody else, we should be able to control it. But that didn't happen. We didn't have the testing. We didn't have the ability to trace on a comprehensive basis as the caseload got bigger and bigger and was seemingly getting more out of hand. And it was pretty clear by March we had a big problem in Orange County and elsewhere as the numbers were starting to rise. So in March, if you followed the models that were the most believable at the time and seemed to have the best scientific foundation, and primarily was the one from the University of Washington, I think it's the IHME, Institute for Health Metrics Evaluation, I believe it stands for. they were doing a pretty good job of predicting where things were headed in terms of numbers of cases and resource utilization. With the caveat throughout all of this that a lot of the trajectory was going to be influenced by the behavior of people, especially with respect to social distancing, which we implemented at the governor's order in mid-March. And we were predicted to reach our peak at about April 21st, our peak number of cases. And the goal was to flatten the curve. And I was out there cheerleading for that in my blog. That was my main purpose. As I was telling people at the time was, I want to protect all of you, but I want to protect me. I don't want to go to work and experience what they were experiencing already in New York, where their emergency departments were totally overrun. If you had a chance to see any of the film that CNN did,
of course,
a camera into the Brooklyn University Hospital, and you could see and understand how healthcare providers were getting sick, because unlike my hospital, where every room is glassed in and where we could immediately isolate people with symptoms, and we're still doing that. I did that yesterday on my shift. I worked in that particular part of the emergency department, where anybody with a fever or a cough or shortness of breath went into one area, into a glass room, totally isolated from all the other patients. And each of us going in to see those patients was totally wearing the appropriate personal protective equipment. You watch these films from the Brooklyn University Hospital, there's flimsy curtains between most of the patients, but there were so many patients, they were also lined up in the hallways. And the doctors and nurses are going from patient to patient without changing their gear. They had no time and they didn't have enough of the equipment. So I wanted to avoid that. I did not want to put my life at that level of risk. And I didn't want to put my patients and my coworkers at that level of risk. And so my message to the community was, okay, I'll be there for you, as will my coworkers and my hospital. We will do the right thing for you. Please do the right thing for us and follow the governor's recommendations. Social distance, wash your hands, and do what you can to flatten the curve. That was the big message. And we crushed it. We did exactly what we needed to do. And by the time the projected days came around, our curve was flat, and we had every expectation that it would decline from there. So it was good news, very excited, celebrated, whatever. Community was stepping up and doing the right thing. And those same models predicted mid to late May would be a safe time for states like ours to begin reopening with the numbers we were seeing. What started happening in early May, as you remember, the most notable place that was obvious was Huntington Beach, and I guess still continues to be. And my Huntington Beach friends get mad at me when I talk about Huntington Beach like this. But we started to see the anti-lockdown protesters coming out. But we had it in Laguna Beach where I live. We had it in Newport Beach as well. But Huntington was probably the most publicized. And it was happening everywhere. People coming out, not wearing masks, demanding the governor resign and basically out there saying that this is all a hoax. And even those that weren't saying it was a hoax, they would say, oh, it's overblown. We haven't seen those cases. The models were wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And they sort of went into, and I did try and address this in my post, sort of went into this real weird catch-22 type thinking where they're saying, we didn't need to do the things we did. And we didn't need to shut down the economy. We didn't need to lose our jobs. All of these things we didn't need to do because of all of this mostly conspiracy-based thinking about how, Dr. Fauci was somehow involved in a conspiracy and how we don't need to do this stuff. The result of doing the things we did was we flattened the curve and kept the caseload down. Had we not done it, in fact, another article today, estimated that maybe 5 million more cases, 1.7 million in California, were prevented by going through all of these things. Which is,
it's really wonderful that when people practice a little bit of self-discipline, and I have empathy for people who feel they have economic responsibilities or there's peer pressure or political pressure. I understand that, but most people, it seemed, were able to shelter in place, to follow the rules, to play it safe for not just themselves, but everybody else, for, enough weeks for the curve to begin to flatten. Now the worry is the curve might spike again, because people are taking the reopening of society gradually too far. They see it as a license to, well, if I can do X, Y, and Z that I used to do, I can do the whole alphabet of things I used to do. And now, even though we can applaud the discipline that many people have shown, maybe we're even in a harder stage now because people can understand stay at home. What's harder is how to titrate their behavior out in the real world. If they go back to work, or they want to go to a restaurant, or if they want to go to the beach in bigger numbers, and they want to walk around without masks, and maybe they're not going to wash their hands like Sanjay Gupta showed us how to do in CNN, where, you sing the birthday song twice. So the reality is we might be at a very scary inflection point right now.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that the word that really comes to mind is complacency. And I think that people, because maybe they don't know somebody who got sick and died. Maybe they, believe that because we haven't seen the leadership at really any level that is implementing rules and following them and explaining why, that this is overblown. And because the economic impact to them, they're feeling that a lot more than they're feeling coronavirus, because they haven't gotten sick and don't know anybody who is, or they feel they're young and healthy, and even if they get it, it's just the flu, which is another misconception being spread out there, which is as deadly as the virus itself. That because of that way of thinking, it is leading them to take actions that are unsafe, with the lack of recognition that, okay, maybe you'll get it and you're not at risk, but what if you give it to a family member who is older and at risk, or in one of the high-risk groups? Because those people can die, and over 100,000 of them have died in our country. So to say this is no big deal and compare it to other illnesses that are less severe, in just a matter of a few months, it has become the leading cause of death in this country. It's passed everything else. And in a short period of time, not like over the course of a year or a decade, in a few months.
So what can we say to people? When stay at home, shelter in place, people could understand that simple mantra.
Yes. What's
the mantra now? What's the one sentence or phrase that people should remember about, step forward carefully? How do you tell people in a very pithy way they can remember, a way they can live up to, what to do and what not to do?
Okay, well, if you've been reading, you know that brevity is probably not my strong point, but I'm going to try. And I'll tell you what I'm doing personally as well. We cannot stay locked down completely forever, and I don't think we really need to. I think there are simple rules that we should follow, and those rules are really grounded in mutual respect and concern for other people. The mask thing came late in the process. Initially, we were told not to wear masks. That could be an hour discussion. I'm going to make that just a couple of words, and that is that just the understanding that you're not really wearing the mask, and it doesn't need to be an N95 mask. It can be a cloth bandana. It really is to protect you from giving it to somebody else. Likewise, if everybody else is wearing it, they're preventing them from giving it to you. So if you're both doing it, my go-to guy at Hoag, Dr. Phil Robinson, who I've listened to from day one, who has basically told us from day one, it's real simple. You wash your hands, you socially distance, and now you wear a mask for the reasons that I just said. That is going to protect you. And if you do those things as you start to emerge from your sheltering in place and pay attention, your risk is really very, very low. If both of you are wearing a mask, you're not likely to give it to people. When you handle your mask, you need to sanitize or wash your hands. When you touch a surface, even though surface transmission is unlikely, you have your hands on it. You wash your hands. You just be careful, a little bit more aware of the number of times you touch your face after doing things. That's the type of things you can do to minimize your risk. But you also have to look at what your personal risk is. If you're a cancer patient on chemotherapy, or you have some other immune disease, or you're very overweight and diabetic and high blood pressure, I mean, the things that unfortunately some people have learned to live with, your risk is higher. And you might want to stay in place longer than some of the rest of us might. My wife and I have started to go back into society, but we are being very careful. We're washing hands. We've been out to eat, but we're going to places where they're following the rules and keeping people apart. One of our favorite restaurants put in plexiglass separators from each booth. And knowing that they are paying attention and being very careful makes your risk, I think, very low. The risk will never be zero. And if you don't feel comfortable taking a smaller risk, there's nothing wrong with figuring out how to manage at home until we have a vaccine and until we know that the virus is under control. And if I was in a higher risk group, I would be even more careful than I'm being now.
And what's your best guess, and I know it is a guess for everybody, about when a vaccine might be available, and not just available theoretically, but having been thoroughly tested and produced in sufficient quantity to inoculate enough people in any given society? What's your best guess?
My best guess is we're looking at maybe a year from now, if we're lucky. I've seen more optimistic projections than maybe the beginning of next year. I'd be a little more cautious than that. That may be overly optimistic to get it tested and know that it's safe before it's going to be out there. But I think unrealistic to expect by maybe next summer we will see it. People starting to.
Yeah, and clearly social gatherings in large numbers, like at movie theaters and sporting events, are not going to happen for a while, at least if people are being responsible. A lot of churches have pushed to reopen. Orthodox synagogues, especially ultra-Orthodox synagogues, have pushed to reopen. But I'm impressed that the Jewish community, the more liberal Jewish community, religiously, has held back and even made declarations, not just our synagogue and not just in Orange County, but nationally, have said, pikuach nefesh, saving a life, is the most important value. And you can gather virtually in services, as we have been doing now since mid-March. You can gather virtually in services and meetings, and we run Hebrew school and preschool and adult education and Zoom Hangouts online. And, while there's clearly a difference, physical distancing doesn't have to mean social distancing. The same goes with people with their friends, right? I mean, I feel that we're physically distant now, but we're having a conversation, right? We're having a meaningful conversation, so when I kind of prefer the term physical distancing, but everybody uses social distancing. But the reality is that a lot of meaningful human interaction can happen online. People are starting to call people they haven't talked to in 6 months or 50 years, right? Like old college buddies or friends from another city they lived in. Part of it is to fill the time. They may have some discretionary time, although I think many of us feel we're busier than ever because we have to work in a different way. But there's something very impressive about how resilient people can be even within a discipline. In other words, it is a medical curse, right? This pandemic is terribly tragic. But if people can think of creative, imaginative ways to be resilient, they can still have a very full life. And so, even people who have to go out for some things can continue indoors having a life that's full.
Yeah, and I agree. And again, I think you have to look at the big picture. This really is temporary.
Yes.
This is something that we have to make some short-term sacrifices so that in the long run, we can get our lives back to what they were. And I mean, a really good example is New Zealand, just to get back into the news. New Zealand yesterday declared this is over. So they're getting together in New Zealand. They're having parties. They don't need to wear masks. They're being careful, but they now, because they took extreme measures early on and now have the capability to test and isolate and contact trace, they're going to be able to do what we should have been able to do here in January. Our lives are what they are because we blew it. We didn't have the infrastructure in place to deal with this when we might have avoided it. But this is the reality we have now. And if we choose not to deal with the reality in the way we've been talking about with social distancing and masking and hand washing and making some short-term sacrifices, which are painful. And they're painful, especially to the economy and people who are in certain businesses that are more affected than others. And I get that, and I feel that, and I understand that. My own children, their jobs are all horribly affected, and they're just all recently out of college and had their whole lives to look forward to. And now look what they're dealing with. It's very, very different than what they thought they were going to be doing a few months ago. So we're all making sacrifices, and I get that. But if we don't make those sacrifices now, it's going to prolong the pain into the future.
Let me ask you about a second wave that we hear so much about. First they were saying if a second wave comes. Now it sounds more like when a second wave comes. If a second wave comes, might that second wave come, and how long might it last?
That's a really tough question to answer because in some respects we're still kind of dealing with the backwash from the first wave. Today, I looked at the Orange County statistics before writing my post this morning. Today we have twice as many people in the ICU as we did a month ago when it was supposed to be our peak. And the number today is the highest ever. So we're not, out of that first peak. It never went away because we started relaxing too early, I think. I would expect if this coronavirus behaves like other coronaviruses that we've dealt with before, including the one that causes the common cold, the new surge and new peak should come, during traditional flu season, which starts usually, in the fall, like in October. So I think that is when I would expect it to come back. I'm not sure. Nobody's sure because the behavior of this virus is so strange, and the behavior of society has not been universal like it was in New Zealand in fighting it. So there's so many variables that make that hard to predict. I'm hopeful that because we have had time to now prepare, that we won't see a surge like we saw affecting New York and Italy and Spain the past few months, that we won't have that same level of overwhelming, just horrific disease and death. But I think the caseloads are going to go up, and hopefully they'll still be within our medical capabilities of handling them and minimizing the amount of death. Plus, hopefully we'll have some new treatments, new approaches as we understand how to treat the people who got really, really, really sick, which is, again, a small number of people in the aggregate, but it's added up to, again, over 100,000 deaths, which by no means is a small number.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for being with us during services today and sharing your wisdom with us and your experience. And I do suggest people go to your blog so that they can continue to seek wisdom from you. So again, Shabbat Shalom, Eric. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rabbi, and Shabbat Shalom to you and all of the rest of you. And please stay safe. Wash your hands.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure. Take care.